It's a great pleasure for me to address you tonight and to thank you for being here and for enriching my life. The tapestry of gratitude and healing. Gratitude is in the middle of this particular sentence. And so I will start with that. I want to express my gratitude to the many people who've supported me and with many of you who are here tonight who have come to share this special occasion. I thought I might start with a song that will chase my children out. It goes, La dolce vita, la dolce vita. They said, don't, Dad, don't. Let's not go further. If I think about my life, and Professor Volving has mentioned quite a bit about it, I don't think it looks anything like this. It's certainly not a single track, and it is not particularly steep either. Also, looking at this particular image, I found a label for most of the rows: public health, primary healthcare, rural health, mother and child care, psychiatry, experimental therapeutics, medicine development, internal medicine, and clinical pharmacology. But these rows don't interlink. None of them belong together. They're all in different directions. So that's not for me either. So let's rather go to the image of a tapestry. Tapestry is a piece of textile fabric with pictures or designs formed by weaving colored weft threads. The art of tapestry making has been around for millennia, and the first weaving dating back to 1483 before Christ was found in Egypt. Some of the most beautiful European tapestries were produced during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period in France and the Low Countries, which is the current Belgium, Netherlands, and Flanders was in fact a hot seat of tapestry making. The tapestries could easily be rolled up, different from pictures. They could be moved, they could be displayed for specific occasions. And I am displaying my tapestry tonight. I want to use the tapestry analogy for my life, where the weaving loom and the warp threads are analogous to growing up in a wonderful family, attending special schools, being able to conduct studies, do research, do teaching, learn from patients, learn from mentors, learn from supervisors. In this tapestry are also strands of my emotional development, commitment to compassionate care, equity, and social justice, and the sense of enormous gratitude for the enormous opportunities and the support I have received. In the words of Shelley Glashow, the Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist, tapestries are made by many artisans working together. The contributions of separate workers cannot be discerned in the completed work, and the loose and false threads have been covered over. So it is in our picture of particle physics. I want to start with my parents. My mother, Hanne, who's here, and my father, Günther. They got married in Goedverwacht, 4th of July, 1954. Now, I don't know how many of you know where to find Goedverwacht. At a recent COPDES conference, I spoke about Ulrike and I meeting at Nooitgedacht. And Professor Volving said he was glad it was not alles verloren. Now I'm introducing you to Goedverwacht. Unfortunately, my father cannot be with us tonight. He passed away about 40 years after the wedding day on the 12th of September 1994. But I want to dedicate this lecture to Günther, to my father. The family came from Germany. My maternal grandparents from Stuttgart, and my grandmother from Neckarsulm. My father's mother grew up in Dresden and Leipzig. And my grandfather grew up in Sonderborg in the south of Denmark. His father was a general practitioner. He left Europe because he found it stuffy. He didn't like all the stuff. He didn't like the narrow-mindedness. So he ran off to the colony and came to Namibia as a 19-year-old. Helgoland was an island that they visited when he was young. And I want to point out the red cliffs of Helgoland. I would express my deepest gratitude to my parents. They taught me the essence of seeking the truth, questioning the norm, living a compassionate life, combating injustice, and striving to heal. They provided a loving home and a broad spectrum of opportunities for emotional and academic growth. Mutti, I thank you. I'd also like to express my gratitude to my parents-in-law, Monica and Ulrich from Stellenbosch, who are also with us tonight, for their love and support. And then it goes without saying that Ulrika has been a particular pillar of strength, an incredible support, source of love. And my children, Joshua, Nadia, and Mark is studying for an electronic engineering test tomorrow and has not thought fit to be here tonight. My father and all 6 of us children were born in Windhoek and grew up in Windhoek. Grandfather had a farm in the Kalahari, and if you look at the red sand, you can probably think why he recalled the farm that was called Soutputs to Helgoland, because it reminded him of the red cliffs of the island of Helgoland. My mother was born in Paramaribo in Suriname, just to the north of Brazil on the equator. Her father was a Moravian missionary, and he worked in Bethesda Leprosy Hospital. My mum and her sister Heidi were born in Paramaribo, and they grew up initially at the Leprosy Hospital and thereafter in Paramaribo, where my grandfather looked after the Rust and Vrede congregation. In 1934 they moved to Goedverwacht, which is close to Piketberg. My grandfather suffered badly from malaria and was advised to rather move to a place where there was less malaria. So that's how they came to South Africa. My 5 siblings have already briefly been introduced by Prof Helmuth. Gudrun, who's an OT, Gerhard is a professor of meteorology, Helga heads Department of Occupational Therapy at the University of Namibia, H.O. wildlife vet, and Herman, my youngest brother, who looks now after the UCT rural students in George and Oudtshoorn. I went to school at the Deutsche Privatschule, and secondary school was at a school called Hermansburg, founded in 1856, the oldest co-educational school in South Africa. Thereafter came to Stellenbosch, and you may see at the right bottom, we also went to PAL for obstetrics training. So that's had a lot for training in a rural place outside of the main hospital, and obstetrics and all. Just cases, I want to share 2 cases because I learned almost everything that I learned by clinical contact. I've always not been a great believer in big classrooms, and I've been a particular great believer in clinical medicine and learning around the bedside, learning contextualized with other professionals in an interdisciplinary fashion. The first patient that I want to briefly present to you is a young, unemployed man who lived in poverty. And he presented with a massive hemoptysis. Now, hemoptysis is the coughing up of blood. Most of this blood ended over my white coat. He was diagnosed with smear-positive tuberculosis. He survived his stay in hospital, but I don't know what happened to him after he left hospital. Second was a 35-year-old truck driver who presented with fever, night sweat, severe headache. It was the first patient that I ever done a lumbar puncture on. 2 days later, he developed a stroke. I wasn't sure whether I was the cause for the stroke. The thinking was that he probably had cerebral vasculitis related to his TB meningitis that we did diagnose from the lumbar puncture and the findings of a high protein level, lymphocytes, and a low glucose level in the cerebrospinal fluid. Magnetic resonance imaging was not available at the time. And HIV was basically unknown, certainly not known in South Africa. So when I started studying medicine in 1981, the word HIV and AIDS, the words, were not yet in use. The first article on the condition actually appeared in the New York Times on the 1st of July, 1981. It was advertised as a rare cancer seen in 41 homosexual men. Gay men were dying of an unusual disease. They presented with purple spots of their skin that also involved the mucocutaneous surfaces, and before they died, they often had swollen lymph nodes. This condition was later recognized as Kaposi sarcoma, AIDS-defining illness. We also now know that it was caused by co-infection with the human herpes virus 8. A month before the New York Times article was published, there was a notice in the MMWR, the Morbidity Mortality Weekly Report of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and they reported a series of pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, PCP cases. Previously, these cases had been seen in severely immunocompromised patients, mainly recipients of organs, so-called organ transplant recipients. They called this condition acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS. At the time, scientists did not know what caused it. This is an X-ray of pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. The organism has been renamed Pneumocystis jirovecii, and it has also been reclassified as a fungus. And on this slide, you can see the cysts of Pneumocystis jirovecii, and they're stained by toluidine blue stain. So it wasn't a period between 1983 and 1984 that the human immunodeficiency virus, or as we call it now, HIV, was identified as the causative agent of AIDS. And it was also found that this particular virus had the ability to destroy CD4 positive helper cells. Okay, so after studies, a group of friends and I all moved to Namibia. For me, that was moving home. For many of the friends, this was a new venture into another country. And we completed our internship at the Windhoek State Hospital complex, which was consisted of Katutura Hospital, the new clinical block, which is now called Windhoek Central Hospital, and 2 mental facilities. It was a good year in many ways. We traveled, we saw a lot of the country, we worked hard, we learned good skills. For the students here, we still used to work from a Friday to a Monday morning. That was normal. The advantage of that was that we had more time off, possibly. In those days, we could then take weekends away and travel to the wonderful wild areas of Namibia. Last year, we had a reunion, 30 years after our internship, and we got together and we were still equally happy, joyful, and enjoyed reminiscing about our times as students and as interns. To share another experience I had as an intern in the Department of Ear, Nose and Throat, ENT. I was asked to see a young lady who had a massive epistaxis, nose bleeding. It didn't look like a localized nose problem, and I thought that she probably had a systemic illness that was causing this bleeding. First step was to resuscitate her, put her blinds, give crystalloid fluids, and then try to block this bleeding from happening. So I had once seen the procedure being done, and this was now my first attempt at a profusely bleeding, very anxious lady to put this yellow bismuth iodine paraffin paste soap tape into both nose canals. It was partially successful, and after the bleeding had stopped, I examined her properly. I found that she had abscess of the breast, and my diagnosis was that she probably had septicemia with a disseminated intravesical coagulopathy and with a profuse bleeding from her nose. But of course, we also have to think of Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, or in Namibia, normally known as Congo fever. Now, at the time, specifically in 1985, there was a nosocomial outbreak of Congo fever at Tygerberg Hospital. 2 patients had died. 7 had contracted the disease. 2 of those had not been in direct contact with the initially suspected person who had Congo fever. And it is this understanding that I didn't get particularly much support from other colleagues and nurses and anybody with this patient who was bleeding, because they all thought this is probably Congo fever. The ENT consultant also decided to rather help me over the phone than come out. He advised me, phone Professor Oosthuizen, he knows most about this. I phoned Professor Oosthuizen, the one and only consultant physician, just before midnight. And this was not the most pleasant phone call ever. I got more than a mouthful. The consequences were the patient was quarantined, so was the doctor. I had to cancel my first planned weekend trip to see Ulrika, who was at that stage a 30 occupational therapy student in Stellenbosch. She was devastated by the news, but in equal measures that I wouldn't come, that I had possibly contracted Congo fever, but I think probably most that I had upset physician consultants, because she does not like any form of conflict, and that has not changed. I'm glad to report that the patient responded very well to antibiotics, and that we did culture, I think, group A, streptococcus from the blood culture. It was the beginning of a great friendship with Prof Helmuth. The times were, however, also difficult. It was a very difficult time. It was the time of war. These machines don't make any noise now. They're not killing now on the slide, but they were used for killing. They were used to defend a border. They were used to suppress people. It was against that background that many of my colleagues and I had to make decisions about our life in South Africa or Namibia. White South Africans called this the border war, Grensoorlog. In Angola it was known as the Angolan Civil War, and I like to refer to it as the Namibian War of Independence. It was fought between SNDF and UNITA on the one side, and FAPLA and Clan, the armed wing of SWAPO, on the other side. The battle culminated in the siege of Naval, which probably started at the end of 1986 and lasted into 1988. And it was probably, allegedly, the largest battle on African soil since World War II. Despite heavy casualties on both sides claimed victory. The one good thing about the Battle of Naval was that it resulted in the first round of trilateral negotiations mediated by the USA and secured the withdrawal of Cuban South African troops from Angola and Namibia by 1991. It's against that background that I had to make a decision, and my decision was not to fight the apartheid war. I applied for conscientious objector status, which was granted. It gave me the possibility to remain in Southern Africa and work in public healthcare facilities. It was an extraordinarily meaningful and life-changing experience. I was placed into the head office of the Department of Community Health and Primary Care. I got the somewhat presumptuous title of Director of the Namibian HIV/AIDS Awareness Campaign. I knew little of what I was doing, but I had good teachers. Sister Rosa Damasis was an excellent clinical epidemiologist, and Sister Pandu Hailonga was trained in primary health care and preventive health strategies. We worked on an expanded program of immunization, worked on the Namibian TB control program, and generally tried to strengthen health systems and supported outlying hospitals. Pandu became a good friend. She's done a master's in health education and promotion at Leeds Metropolitan University, and later she went to the Netherlands and obtained a doctorate in development studies. She's been a particularly important weaver in my tapestry, a lady of great inspiration. She's now the Global Fund Director at the Ministry of Health and Social Services. Now, a part of the job was to support rural hospitals, and I just want to point out a few with wonderful names: Opuo, Koregas, Okakarara, Okahandya. Now, the beauty of these places was that they took us right into wild areas. Again, when we came there, we worked hard. We needed to support the TB program, we needed to work on primary healthcare, we needed to do in the area of these regional hospitals clinic surveys and look at integration and see that they all followed particular patterns. But sometimes it also allowed us to do some game viewing. And the wonderful thing about this area of the Kunene region is that these are not fenced. These are wild, roaming, big creatures, and I love them. In Namibia, there were regions that were managed almost like Bantustans in South Africa. So they were called Ovambuland, which we now call the North. There was Kavango, Kaukuveld, Caprivi. And they had their own regional directors, and the integration between the Ministry of Health in Namibia, Central in Windhoek, and these regions was not good. The general feeling was that they were not putting enough efforts into public health and primary health care. And then I got the wonderful task to move to Rundu and tackle some of those problems. It took two of us to go there. So Ulrike agreed that we should go together. We got married in Stellenbosch, packed up all our stuff into old clapped out combi, and up we drove, literally into new life. Now Rundu, you need to think of, it's on the Okavango River. The war was fought in this area. It's not far away from Cuito-Cuianaval. To the north of the river was Angola, a UNITA stronghold at the time. Rundu had 2 shops, no child roads. When we arrived, no telephone, so we needed to go to the post office, Tiki telephone. And the first time Ulrike phoned home, the parents couldn't hear her because the bullfrogs were croaking so loud. Something like that. Anyway, it was also a beautiful countryside. Just a few photos. This is a typical way people would fetch water from the river. There was no running water for everyone. There were some little boats. This is what happened in the rainy season, flooding of areas. You can imagine the risk of bilharzia and malaria. And this was the route to hospital. Ulrike and I walked daily. It was a wonderful time. We could walk to work together, and often we were able to go home together again. The running of a rural hospital, I think, has been very similar across many African countries. So basically, again, along practical lines. It's a female ward, where the doctors also do obstetrics and neonatology, a male ward, and a pediatric ward. Every doctor had to participate in all after-hour call duties, and everybody needed to be able to give an anesthetic or do surgical procedures. And usually in the wards, it would be one person who would be more interested in the medical side and anesthetics, and the other person would be more interested in the surgery, and that would be the ENT and ophthalmology, and. On top of that was district surgeon work. So these were forensic pathology, post-mortems needed to be done. People died. It was war, the crocodiles, malaria, people were murdered, and it was the responsibility of the doctor to establish cause of death, unnatural death. Not my favorite job I ever did, I must say. Some doctors participated in private practice, and I used this opportunity to do some primary healthcare work. Just a picture of the pediatric ward where Ulrike and her assistant shared out Christmas presents. You can see that we had a mix of acute patients and chronic patients. Person with hydrocephalus, Anselm, who was badly disabled, patient with Perthes disease. And then this gentleman, little boy here, he had also a nosebleed, so we're back to bleeding. Besides working in the hospital, we also had the responsibilities to service the entire area, 160 kilometers to the west, 200 kilometers to the east, and most of the doctors didn't particularly like this because then they came back and still had to do other work. I loved it. So I became the de facto clinic doctor. I had the hat of primary healthcare, and I drove a lot. We did primary healthcare, we supported nurses, we supported training programs. There were wonderful people. I met some wonderful people. Sister Sebastian, who I would call the Mother Teresa of Nyangana. Nyangana was a Roman Catholic missionary station and hospital. A bit further to the east, Andara, probably my favorite place as a clinic, and where I still threaten Ulrika that I will go and work there. She was asked me as what? I said, maybe obstetrician. These photos were taken last year when we did a family holiday, and you can see Herman and I, and Sister Elizabeth, who is now the manager of Andara Hospital. She was a third-year nurse trainee in 1989 when we started at Rundu. Malaria has remained a big problem. The mission at Andara failed 6 times because the people who wanted to start the mission, I'm not quite sure why they wanted to start it, but they died of malaria, black water fever, falciparum malaria. So part of the control of malaria is about vector control, and this includes long-lasting insecticidal nets and indoor residual spraying. Now the entire area around the Kavango River had areas that were blocked out, and there were spraying teams, and their responsibility was to make sure that all residences were sprayed at a certain time of the year, sometimes twice a year, to prevent mosquitoes from coming into the houses. The advantage of these was that they built little camps around the river, and that became one of the areas where I could go to do some bird watching or fishing or nice activities. Malaria is still a problem, and we're in SADC Malaria Week this week, from the 5th to the 9th of November, and it still remains a major problem in neighboring countries as well. So one of these so-called malaria camps was close to the Poker Falls, and this became a haven, and a haven. We had a boat there, we went paddling between the hippos and the crocodiles, and it was not far away from Mahangu and Babwata National Parks, where we had ample opportunity to see a wonderful game. Here depicted a roan antelope, buffalo, African elephant, and the hippo. To my dismay, I learned that there were more responsibilities in Rundu than male ward, female ward, and pediatric ward. And the person who alerted me to the fact was my good wife, Ulrika. She asked me, who's actually looking after the leprosy patients and the TB patients? I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, no, there's a lot of work to be done. They're there. And I went and I found out, and there they were. It was actually a little leprosy colony to the eastern side of the hospital that I'd not been aware of. So this was an area that I then did become involved in. I learned how to do skin scrapings and how to make the diagnosis, learned a bit how to treat these patients, and I then became the leprosy doctor of Rundu and followed into the footsteps of my grandfather, who looked after leprosy patients in Paramaribo. Today, in 2018, there's still about 60 leprosy sufferers in the Rundu area. It is said that in the 1980s that there were hundreds of them. Some sources claim as many as 3,000 leprosy patients. It was a colonial construct. They were dumped into a leprosarium without care. These patients who still remain there, actually there because they want to be there. They've often grown up there, they don't have other families, and because of the disfigurement, they feel quite comfortable there. And I've just spoken to a person about the current 60 patients, and they're not trying to be kept there, they want to be there together. Just a few facts about leprosy. Globally, the number of chronic cases was in 2015 estimated at 176,000, which is down from 5.2 million in the 80s. There's still 211,000 new cases per year. It's a chronic infection caused by Mycobacterium leprae, so it's an organism similar to tuberculosis, slightly different. And contrary to common belief, it is not particularly contagious, and it is easily treatable. And we've got various regimens that can be used. They come in blister packs and are easy to use. In the TB ward, which again, to my shame and disgust, I found was full of patients, where many had spinal TB, and there were some that had destroyed lungs. You see this deviation. And Teresa, I think he's also here, she does the research project together with him. So it's still a problem now, and we still see it in Tygerberg now. Now, I got my first opportunity for clinical research in Rundu, and I was invited by Professor Peter Hessling to participate in a study on onioli. Now, onioli is a form of immune thrombocytopenic purpura. The clinical hallmarks include hemorrhagic bullae, the mucosa of the nose, the nasopharynx, and there can be ruptured bullae, epistaxis, gastrointestinal bleeding, and this can result in severe shock. So of the 51,000 admissions to Rundu State Hospital between 1981 and 1988, 612, about 1.2%, were diagnosed with onioli. Now this is the boy who was in the photo of the Christmas party. And this was, at this stage, I was a bit better at putting bismuth stoppings. This is a typical picture of the bullae, the hemorrhagic bullae on the hard palate, and this is a picture of Professor Hessling, his daughter Annika, and his lovely wife. Now the study that we did, we looked at giving high-dose intravenous gamma globulin to patients that had a very low platelet count, 6 times 10 to the power 9, and were bleeding actively. And I can report back that within 3 days, these patients stopped bleeding, and that we did not report any side effects. In Rundu, there were a number of people that inspired me. A particular impressive friend was Dr. Libatina Amatila. She was born in Fransfontein, close to Corigas, and grew up in very poor circumstances. She left the country in 1962, traveled on her own to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and was then able to study medicine in Poland, Sweden, and London. Had she remained in Namibia, it's extremely unlikely that she would have had the opportunity to study medicine. She came back in 1989 after she'd initiated a number of health centers and education centers in Zambia and Angola, mainly for Namibians who lived there in exile. She visited us on 2 occasions in Rundu, and we had the opportunity to become quite close friends. She later served as the Minister of Health and Social Services, and also the Deputy Prime Minister of Namibia. In 1999, she was elected chairperson of the WHO Regional Committee for Africa, and in 2000, the president of the World Health Assembly. It's again, I think one must just look and think a bit about where she came from the dusty roads. But she took the road, and she found freedom, and she found excellent education, and came victoriously back to Namibia. On the 21st of March 1990, we celebrated the independence of Namibia. For most in Rundu, this was a joyful occasion, a lot of positivity, but unfortunately the immediate after effects of this were that there was a contraction of the economy, and there was an exodus of doctors from the area. This included doctors who had worked in the army in Angola and Namibia, and it also included doctors from Rundu. And let me tell you, it is not easy to run a hospital with hardly any doctors. Because night duties continue, weekend duties continue, forensic pathology continues, babies are born, children die, onioli patients start bleeding. So it became a time where what we investigated in primary healthcare would put to the test. I could, in general, although I don't have hard data, say that over a period of 2 years, there had been good developments in terms of primary healthcare. They had developed good communication channels between the Ministry of Health in Bintu and the region. There was good collaboration with other African countries and health policy makers. After the second episode of malaria and days and nights of hardly any sleep, I became depressed, and Ulrika guided us away from Rundu. It was difficult, but paradoxically, it was the time when new doctors came to Rundu. The timing was just about right. With the help of UNDP, WHO, and UNICEF, the doctors recruited, and we just had a period of overlap, and in the end, I think that the hospital actually was better off. They became a regional hospital with specialization, probably a more sustainable model for the level of care provided at Rundu, but at the cost of many more doctors needed. I think that these services that to the outlying clinics suffered under this new dispensation, but there were good primary healthcare centres, there were good teams, there was a good immunisation program, and after all, it went well. We took a short break, including some wonderful playing on the dunes, paragliders, and skiing, and it ended in disaster. I had a massive fall. I broke my back, I broke my ankle, and now I became the recipient of Harrington rot. And many of you may know that my ankle has not been good ever since. These were the two gentlemen who helped me, Rodney Lichtman, who was the anaesthetist, and Jürgen Walmsberger, who was the orthopedic surgeon. After this injury, we stayed on in Windhoek. Ulrike got a job as the occupational therapist in Windhoek Hospital, and I started a job in the Department of Mental Health. This is where Professor Franz got to know me better and thought that I would be the obvious successor to his mental health department. It didn't happen that way. Their daughter Shishani is an anthropologist and music sensation in Namibia. I learned a lot from Constant Franz. He was quite an artist with medicines, and he used many drugs and he utilized them at different doses, and he would get the balance right of just getting the right effect of a particular drug and use something else, just make sure that the side effects wouldn't be too bad. And he did that in a quite beautiful way, and he was very well educated as a neuropsychopharmacologist, clinical neuropsychopharmacologist, and I learned a lot about how to manage personalized healthcare and looking at the effects of drugs and combating the potential side effects and reacting to them if they were there. But I did find the chronically admitted patient in psychiatry difficult, and I missed excitement. So I applied for a job in the ICU, went to the ICU in Windhoek. It was a pediatric adult ICU. Again, worked together with Rodney Lichtman, who was an anaesthetist, and Ockie Oosthuizen. And it was through Ockie Oosthuizen that I met Martin Lockwood, who was a nephrologist and therapeutic immunologist from Cambridge. Now, I had not previously thought of moving and leaving the country, but suddenly Cambridge did sound quite interesting. And I still wanted to specialize, and there we went. We took our bags, went to Cambridge, and it was very, very different from the dusty roads of Rundu, leprosy patients, and now strolling over the backs or taking a punt on the River Cam, looking at Clare College, King's College, or the chapel, did fill us with many wonderful opportunities and experiences. Now, Cambridge is a bit different. It started all in 1209. You may know that in Cambridge they don't study medicine, they read medicine. And they do not graduate with the ME, CHB, but with the BA, and the MA is conferred by right on holders of the BA degree of the university, and holders of the MA automatically become members of the Senate. But different to Oxford, a PhD at Cambridge is a PhD and not a DPhil. The Dean of the Faculty of Medicine is called the Regius Professor of Physics. And Sir Keith Peters was this very Regius Professor of Physics. And he was in charge of the laboratory in which I then happened to work as a research registrar. He's been very highly acclaimed in Britain and was highly respected and appointed Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire, GBE, whatever that all means, at the 2018 New Year's Honours for services to medicine. Now, in this particular lab, we worked mainly, most of the researchers and the clinicians worked on immune-mediated renal disease and renal and other connective tissue diseases, mainly systemic lupus erythematosus and systemic vasculitis. Now, autoimmune disease is a disease where the body produces an abnormal immune response that attacks normal body parts, normal organs. And is characterized by antibodies that can be demonstrated, detected in the blood. And in the case of lupus, these include anti-nuclear factor, double-stranded DNA, anti-Smith, anti-RNP antibodies, and a whole spectrum of other antibodies. Now, when I arrived in the lab, everybody seemed to be working on something called ANCA. You're using cell cultures, animal models, mice, rat models, but I'd never heard of ANCA. And I was a bit shy to ask. So I went to the library, which is something very special in Cambridge and in the college. There was no internet, no Google, and I could find nothing about ANCA. Until at the first lab meeting I learned was ANCA, which is the acronym for anti-neutrophilic cytoplasmic antibody. Now this is a picture of ANCA, the various forms. This is a typical C ANCA, cytoplasmic staining, typical perinuclear staining, and these are mainly for the PR3 antigen, and this is directed against the myeloperoxidase antigen. Now, ANCA-associated vasculitis, these are conditions, and there were three main conditions, so-called granulomatosis polyangiitis, microscopic polyangiitis, kidneys, lungs, again with coughing up of blood, skin, peripheral nerves. And the therapeutic management is to control the abnormal immune system. So the agents, steroids, cyclophosphamide, that were particularly good to control it, but only 50% of responders would actually remain in remission, and many would suffer a relapse. Also a problem with toxicities of these drugs. And my mentor, supervisor, Martin Lockwood, pioneered the use of humanized monoclonal antibodies directed against the CD52 protein in a number of immune cells, including T lymphocytes, natural killer cells, macrophages. And these patients were then also included in my project, a scientific study, which I'll tell you a bit more about. But the problem of treating these patients is that one needs to monitor it, one needs to know when do they need their next treatment. And there are a number of things that can be done, blood tests, clinical examinations, but sometimes it's not that clear whether the disease is active again and on which parts is it active. And by using radioisotope labeled leukocyte scans as a non-invasive means to look where are these neutrophils, where are these leukocytes active, where do they move to, where do they migrate to, and where do they cause disease. And this is basically the study that I then got involved in. And I want to take you through this picture. You've previously seen a picture. This is in Wegener's granulomatosis. They often have involvement of the nasal bridge, which then can collapse. And this is a CT scan, and this shows activity and including in the nasal area, in the lungs. At this point, the patient received the monoclonal antibody. You can see how his condition improved stratigraphically. On this graph, I'm showing you the kidney function, and you can see he had a very low glomerular filtration rate, and this improved significantly. And then when the scans got positive again, you can see how his kidney functions deteriorated again. Now, I had the incredible privilege to work with these patients and to also retrospectively look at them. And we had in total 50 patients that we followed with 3 monthly scans. This particular antibody is alemtuzumab. It has been marketed as Campath-1, alemtrada. It's not being used in vasculitis any longer, but can be used for the treatment of chronic lymphocytic leukemia and T-cell lymphomas, as well as multiple sclerosis. Cambridge also provided me the opportunity to act as a speaker at an international conference at Pythagoras House, St. John's College. But I got restless. I felt I was doing too little, too narrow, not enough. So I applied for a job, a clinical training job, not just a research job, at Norwich, and I was very fortunate to get this job. I had to tell Sir Keith that I wanted to leave, and he was not impressed. In his view, I'd seen more than enough patients, and that I could never learn as much from humans as I could study in mice or rats. He also felt that Namibia would benefit more from an astute scientist than a run-of-the-mill nephrologist. He did not use Oki's language, but without further ado, he still ushered me out. He was as red as a tomato, and I reckon I was pretty much pale. Thanks to Martin Lockwood, I could continue working as a research registrar and a specialist registrar in Norwich. With training in pulmonology, HIV medicine, rheumatology mainly, and on the sideline a bit of cardiology and general medicine. A particular advantage of the Norwich rotation, I just started an HIV program, and in that we saw mainly HIV patients who were men having sex with men. Heterosexual transmission was rare. Vertical transmission from mother to child was extremely rare. I don't think there was any case over a period of 2 years. There were a number of cases due to transfusion of infected lab products. These were the days of monotherapy with zidovudine, and just started using diadenosine. So the number of patients that we saw had classical opportunistic infections. We saw Kaposi-sarcoma, Mycobacterium avium complex, PCP, and CMV retinitis. Now the HIV ward rounds was something to behold. There were hardly patients, but we were about a team of 15 specialists. Pulmonologists, oncologists, ophthalmologists, psychologists, counselors, social worker, nurse, and the registrar had to conduct it and lead it, and at the end of it, write a detailed report of everybody's contributions to these particular cases. As I said, the sine qua non of a registrar job in the NHS, writing reports. But it also shows the quality in health services. In Namibia, there were 5 doctors for 200,000 patients, and here were 50 specialists for 3 patients on a ward round. The experience in the rheumatology department in Norwich were good, but nothing out of the ordinary. 1994 was in many ways a very meaningful year. A good year in some ways, a sad year in others. It was the year of the first elections. I had the ability to vote in London, but it was also the year when a very dear friend of mine, Jan Liebenberg, who was a colleague from Windhoek, who worked in the ICU with me, a very close friend. He was killed while he was doing a cycle in Canada. Shortly thereafter, my father passed away. On the good side, Josh was born in this year. And Nadia was born in 1995, and this ushered in our return to Africa. I'd hoped to spend a year in Cape Town and then move back to Namibia. That's always been the plan. Prof James Jabea of Tygerberg offered me a job. I could start earlier than I would have done with Solly Bennett at UCT, and in all of the activities we moved to Stellenbosch and started at Tygerberg. The plans were staying for about a year, getting exams, registration, that all worked well. But then somebody else got the job in Windhoek. And I was offered to start the Department of Internal Medicine in Oshakati. Now Oshakati is to the north of the Tushapans. Dry, dusty, shanty town. Ulrike said no. So we stayed in Stellenbosch, and Mark was born in Stellenbosch, and our children grew up in Stellenbosch. And I had to rethink my life. I'd never thought about South Africans. I'd not thought about a consultant here. Anyway, I got a job thanks to Professor Helmuth Reuter in cardiology. And what we did at Tygerberg was what Tygerberg doctors do. We deliver high quality, affordable patient care, we promote, engage, enterprising under and postgraduate teaching, we do publish and conduct research, and we inform the public about health matters and policy decisions. It was a time when it was also possible to start a very meaningful research platform in the cardiology unit at that stage, in our division. And the diseases that I was particularly interested in were infective endocarditis, SLE, and TB pericarditis. You may ask, why did I not continue with systemic vasculitis work? Because when I asked people how many patients do you see, they had seen 1 5 years ago. So it was not the place to now continue with systemic vasculitis work. In infective endocarditis, we then tested leukocyte scintigraphy with Henri Elman, who's here tonight. And we published that we can use it also in infective endocarditis to look at the site. I had had the incredible opportunity to work in cardiology, rheumatology, and infectious diseases. During that time, I had the wonderful opportunity to attend an advanced rheumatology course in New York. A large number of doctors, and you will see some of these, attended an HIV course at the NIH. You can see Gert, who's a professor of virology now, Anneke, who runs the District TB Center, Hans Brzeski, Yankee, Helena, Ben Maria, who's in Sydney now. So we had this wonderful opportunity, and I think we all bonded. It was not just about what we learned about HIV, but we got to know each other, and we all remained more or less in the field of infectious diseases, and have, I think, made good contributions academically. Now, the main interest in the cardiology field was tuberculous pericarditis, and you can see here an X-ray. A heart should be this size, so this is about 3 times as large as it should be. This is looking at it with echocardiography. You see this last black space here, this is fluid around the heart. It compresses the ventricle, and this is called a pericardial effusion, and one can put a needle into it and drain the fluid. Now, the importance of pericardial effusion is that it was a very common form of heart failure. In the eastern parts of the then Cape province, Eastern Cape, it was known as Transkei heart, because it was the most common cause for cardiac failure. If left untreated, mortality is 85%. So it's a condition that is of immense importance. But the question was how to best diagnose it. And the gold standard was histology. You can see here is the biopsy of the pericardium showing a granulomatous lesion, which is typical of TB. Here is caseation, necrosis with acid-fast bacilli. But sometimes it would look different. This was the HIV positive patient with a CD4 count of 39, where it looked like a purulent pericarditis that one would usually see with bacterial infection, not with TB. And here's an area where there's fibrinous tissue. It's healing. So on these cases, one would not have on histology diagnosed TB pericarditis. So we did a study to look at various biomarkers that would help us to identify, and we found that by using pericardial ADA or interferon gamma, that we could diagnose the condition with a much better efficiency than by using histology or culture. We also developed a clinical score, because not everybody always has the opportunity to analyze the fluid. And this is based on 5 very easily attainable features: weight loss, night sweats, fever, a serum protein level, globulin level, and a peripheral leukocyte count that was on the lower side. And depending on the odds ratio, we worked out the weighting of the scale, and we gave it a 3, 3, 2, 1, 1, and a patient who had 6 or more out of 10 probably had a diagnosis of TB pericarditis. This was a much easier way than to waiting for fluid cultures and histology. These features and our results were verified in a large study that was done by Pandi, and on top of that we found that the expert PCR test would further enhance the possibilities to diagnose tuberculosis. The outcomes of our study was that with a percutaneous pericardiocentesis and indwelling catheter, intermittent daily aspiration, we had a very low rate of constriction, and we had a very low mortality rate of less than 20%. I want to thank Anton Lubell, who was my supervisor and who allowed us to create this beautiful opportunity of doing research. And Anton was quite justly attributed with the Honorary Membership and Lifetime Achievement Award by SA Heart Association in November of 2016. In the same field, Professor Bongani Mayosi did a massive study, and he invited Carl Lombard, Jimmy Volmink, and myself to act on the Data Safety Monitoring Committee. The data was presented in the New England Journal of Medicine, and just a few thoughts. TB pericarditis is a dangerous form of TB that can cause fluid buildup and compression of the heart, killing about a quarter of those who contract it. The INPI trial was the largest ever study done on TB pericarditis. study was completed in Africa, 8 different countries, 19 hospitals, by the Impi Warriors, led by Prof Bongani Mayosi. The main findings of the study were that the prescription of steroids to patients with TB pericarditis made no difference to the eventual mortality rate. HIV positive patients had the increased risk of developing cancer when treated with adjunctive glucocorticoids, but the steroids did have an anti-inflammatory benefit by reducing fibrosis, constriction of the heart, and preventing scarring. It is also the question of the role of adjunctive glucocorticoids, so that it should definitely not be used in HIV-infected patients and only a small number of other patients on a per-patient decision basis. It has created a platform to do more studies in Africa, exploring the treatment of patients, for instance, with hypertension, stroke, rheumatic heart disease, and currently the Invictus study is being done. It is with sadness that we acknowledged Professor Mayosi's death on the 27th of July, 2018. 2 years earlier, he was a speaker at our annual academic day. He and Prof Helmuth have been very good friends, close friends, for a long period of time. We'll remember Prof Mayosi was humility, his integrity, his brilliance, generosity of spirit, approachable demeanor, and his dedication to his work and the improvement of the quality of lives of others. Rundu was still in me, dusty roads, rural health. So the opportunity arose to apply as the director of the Kwanda Center, and I was pushed into this direction by Professor Wynand van der Merwe. My main responsibility as the director of the Kwanda Center was to develop an infrastructure and to establish relationships with the community leaders, members of the community, and healthcare providers who could supervise and teach our students. I also had to obtain funding for staff and running of the center, and this would not have been possible without the team. Leon van der Walt, Jill Fortuin, who did the telematics, Ofi Conradi was the heartthrob of Ukwanda activities in Worcester, Denise Williams, Lindsay Mayer, who were coordinators, Colleen Warrington was in Worcester, and then my colleagues Emile Reed, who's an infectious diseases physician, and Ben Murray, the pediatrician. The Ukwanda Center was basically used for all undergraduate students, also those in human nutrition, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech and language and hearing therapy, and the aim was to train healthcare professionals with the practical knowledge and hands-on experience of the health issues facing rural communities. We hoped that they would be encouraged to work in rural areas and that they would also benefit from interdisciplinary teaching and learning activities. And I believe that interdisciplinary service learning model encourages interprofessional practice and is underpinned by principles of social justice and equity. The area was basically around Worcester, to Wellington, Malmesbury, Ceres, Montague, Robertson, Swellendam, Bredasdorp, Hermanus, Skeleton, and Chabot. And it was a wonderful, we call it the hub and spoke model, where there would be referral, outreach, teaching, and this worked out very well. And again, this would not have been possible without important stakeholders and enablers. Lizette Phillips, who was the manager of Revelskloof when I was in Ukwanda, Lee Schumann, who was the manager of Worcester Regional Hospital, and Franz Kircher, who is also with us now. Thank you for being here, Franz. He was the director of the Boland-Overbeek region and later the director of the Rural Clinical School. And then also from Tygerberg, the Dean's management team, Wynand van der Merwe, Marieke de Villiers, Rio Bester, Barney de Villiers, and Yusuf Chikta, who played very important roles in guiding us and helped us to establish the Ukwanda Center. I think one of our proudest successes was the establishment of a service learning program at the Avon Park Service Learning Center. This is in a poor community on the outskirts of Worcester, and the center provides student-driven interdisciplinary services, including inputs from all the different disciplines in the healthcare professions. Students also do home visits as part of the basic healthcare, and at the same time this acts as a learning opportunity. Important was the forging of community partnerships and to understand the context of patients and to assist them in the areas where they lived in their communities. We did some research to understand what we're doing, and we published this in papers. It included a Cochrane collaboration, and then a group for the collaboration of health equity in education and research, CHEER, and the leadership of Steve Reed, who's also with us now, and Hofi Conradi, Ian Cooper. We looked at basically how South African curricula prepared professionals for working in rural and underserved areas. And this then all resulted in the formation of the Rural Clinical School in 2011, and again, it would not have been possible without in actors that included Raz Fish, Ian Mouton, Professor Jimmy Walming, and additionally the support of the late Professor Russell Botman and his Hope Project. Now, it's been my privilege to work with Professor Russell Botman and to also be his physician. He unfortunately also passed away in 2014. While we worked in Ukwanda, there was an incredible need to do a lot for HIV care. And this included multiple teaching courses across Southern Africa, most provinces of the country. We wrote articles, and in this I want to mention and thank Natasha Bolognesi, who helped me as a co-writer for many articles, and it was a wonderful opportunity to work with you, Natasha, a very gifted writer, and who still produces excellent investigative research articles. And possibly a highlight of my career, although I was only very limitedly involved, was the Siapilala program in Lusikisiki. Lusikisiki may look quite lush, nice, rural, but it's extremely poor. And it is important to realize under what circumstances the HIV project was started. 1 hospital, 12 clinics, 150,000 people, 5 doctors. Lusikisiki is named after the rustling of the reeds and was called Lusikisiki by the Mapondo people. Ukwanda was asked to support MSF by assisting with training and also by doing monitoring of the program and writing the necessary reports. The backbone of the program were the adherence counsellors that would make sure that people would get onto the right medicines at the right time and take them continuously and chronically. This is a comparison between the clinics enrolled onto antiretrovirals and the hospital. You can clearly see that after a short period, there were many more patients recruited at the clinics than at the hospital. It also shows that the viral load was much better suppressed and the CD4 counts had improved more by those patients treated in the community, mainly by community health workers and nurses, not by infectious diseases consultants. It was a very special project in the heart of President Nelson Mandela. He visited Lusikisiki on several occasions, and shortly after the antiretroviral the program started in 2003, he came to Lusikisiki and he would speak to the patients. And he had this to say: the name Siapilala is an appropriate one for the site. It means we are alive. The HIV positive people we see here today are alive. They are healthy and they are happy. What we see is proof that there is life after HIV/AIDS. Let us work together to send that message to communities across South Africa and around the world. The lessons from Lusiki were that the decentralized ARV provision for primary care results in greater enrollment figures than the hospital-based care system, that TB and HIV services can be integrated successfully, that task shifting spreads the workload between doctors, nurses, support staff and the community, and that high community participation results in destigmatization and better adherence rates. This model was then discussed at a major meeting at Maurepen, where also from other provinces and other areas, people who'd worked in the field of delivering antiretroviral therapies in rural areas brought together several thoughts. Now, you can imagine that this combination of Hermann and Helmuth Reuter was not always easy. And at one stage, it involved Minister Chabalala Msimang. And most of you will remember that he was not a particular friend of the ARV program. Claire Keaton was a well-known Sunday Times reporter who had a keen interest in the CFP-LALA program, and she wrote a report about the ARV rollout plans, more or less at the same time when I did the visit, and compiled a report about the readiness of Lusiki for the ARV treatment initiation. So when Hermann, my brother, arrived at the district meeting, armed with a very supportive report, it took him by complete surprise when an agitated district manager started reprimanding him without greeting him. How can your brother write such nonsense? We trusted you and expected him to write a positive report which we could share with the provincial HAS coordinator and the MEC. Hermann was confused and responded, "Have you seen my brother's report? He only sent it to me last night." District manager, "We did not expect him to run to the media and discredit our health minister. How can he do that? The minister phoned the MEC and threatened to discipline us and stop all ARV activities in our district." Hermann said, "Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about. My brother did not send anything to the media." District manager, "He did. We saw it. The minister forwarded it to us." Hermann asked politely, "Can you show it to me, please?" She showed him the printout of Claire Keaton's article that has also been distributed electronically through Reuters news agency. You realize what it takes. But that's not my brother. There it is Reuters. Now, the confusion is not any better with my niece Anya, working Cardiology in the field of MDR and XDR TV, and my cousin Hanno Reuter, who has an email address hreuter@sun.ac. Anya does splendid work in Cardiology now for MSF, and I've had the privilege to see what they're doing. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's just taken a new step also again of healthcare, of emptying the TB hospitals and providing good and scientifically well-structured TB programs in the community. Now, there was life beyond communicable diseases: psoriasis, psoriatic nails, dactylitis, rheumatoid arthritis, uveitis with pus in the eye due to chronic inflammation of the eye, a child with arthritis, JIA, hidradenitis suppurativa, an autoinflammatory reaction involving glands and tissues, especially in the axilla and the groins. Now, it is true that certain teas may help ease stiffness and pain, but they have not been shown to be disease modifying. Steve Jobs said that he was particularly saddened by the fact that he'd not earlier gone for better treatment for his pancreatic cancer and had spent too much time using herbal remedies. He also said, "I think the biggest innovations of the 21st century will be at the intersection of biology and technology. A new era is beginning." In rheumatology, this era has become fact. The T cells produce cytokines that stimulate macrophages, and these are cytokines. They have interleukin-1, interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, and they produce an inflammatory reaction in the bone that causes chondrocytes and osteoclasts to become active, and this in the end results in what we call a chronically inflamed joint of rheumatoid arthritis. Now, with modern technology, we can build monoclonal antibodies, and they can bind the TNF messenger so that it does not cause this inflammatory reaction. Now, I had worked with monoclonal antibodies in Cambridge in 1994, In 2007, these were coming to South Africa, now commercially available for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis. And I heard the calling. So I, with the help of Ulrika, started Winelands Rheumatology Centre, the Winelands Medical Research Centre. We grew and we were supported by Gareth Tarr and Bridget, who joined us. We had a fantastic staff of nurses, occupational therapists, pharmacists to help us run a very successful and meaningful research project that would allow patients, that is state patients, public patients, any patients, to access treatment with these monoclonal antibodies for their debilitating rheumatological and autoimmune diseases. The data has been published in the Lancet Rheumatology Journal, study of leprosy in arthritis rheumatology, and SLE, lupus. The reason why I initially thought I'd gone to Cambridge has become our main focus area. So here is altuzumab, CD52 antibody that we'd used in Cambridge 20 years earlier, leprosy, abatacept, belimumab, tabalumab, atacicept. And currently we believe that atacicept is probably the most. Also, as a strengthening of services, we believe that we should forge forces, for lack of a better word, with orthopedics and radiology, and form the Institute for Orthopedics and Rheumatology. So the collaboration with Stellenbosch University divisions of Rheumatology and Orthopedics, including the Institute for Sport and Exercise Medicine. We also partnered with Mediclinic, and we're busy jointly developing the Mediclinic Winelands Orthopedic Hospital, which will be at the site of the current Mediclinic Hospital, and a new hospital is being built for all the other disciplines. In March, I returned to full-time academia. I don't know whether it's going from top to bottom, or whether it's a tsunami-like reaching out to the skies, but it certainly was suddenly very attractive. I'd previously been asked to consider the position in clinical pharmacology, and I thought somebody was not thinking straight, because I was definitely not interested. So what had changed? What has changed that under Professor Rosenkrantz and Dr. Eric de Kloot, pharmacology has changed to a very vibrant atmosphere of clinical pharmacology with a wonderful undergraduate teaching and learning program, well-structured MA in clinical pharmacology. There was a postgraduate diploma, acknowledged as a Center of Excellence by PharmaTrain, and there were prominent infectious diseases researchers involved in pharmacokinetic studies. The division had also purchased a liquid chromatography mass spectrometry device that would allow on-site PK analysis. I was keen to back into academia in the university environment. Over a long period, I'd been involved in teaching therapeutics and participating in clinical trials. I had a new interest in PK studies and pharmacovigilance. I was keen to teach students and specializing doctors principles of therapeutics and rational drug use. I was also keen to optimize therapies for patients with communicable and non-communicable diseases. Clinical pharmacology also allowed for a broad spectrum of interests across many disciplines, from neonatology, pediatrics, to geriatrics, psychiatry. I also was committed to contributing to the establishment of an affordable and rational national health insurance to provide access to quality health services for all South Africans based on their health needs, irrespective of their socio-economic status. Healing is the process that diminishes suffering and restores well-being by addressing a complex interaction of biological, psychological, and social factors. It may include the repair of tissues, the diminishing of mental strife, but it goes far beyond the use of pharmaceuticals and psychotherapy. In the context of this inaugural presentation, healing also applies to the mending of strained interpersonal relationships. It's striving for democracy, addressing social injustice, and combating health inequity. Back to my analogy. It is a rich, multifaceted, multicolored tapestry, but not yet complete. It includes joyful and sad events, the birth and death of loved ones and icons of our time. Each one of you attending will have heard, seen, or experienced something different in the tapestry. All of you should be aware of my immense gratitude for your support and that of mentors, colleagues, students, and patients. The tapestry will further be embellished as new opportunities, both to be grateful for and to heal, present themselves as medicine evolves. Thank you.